Perspectives, Finding Common Ground, a podcast series that brings together a panel of thought leader perspectives as a forum to socialize and problem solve education technology issues with the goal to ultimately find common ground.
Hi, and welcome to this episode of Perspectives, Finding Common Ground. This is a podcast series dedicated to examining key challenges in the EdTech industry through the perspective or exploration of different stakeholder perspectives. It's a series of chats among friends who have a common interest in the topic. While the world is full of forces that cause division and pull us apart, we believe we still have more in common in the ability to advance solutions that are greater than the sum of the parts. It's our goal that this podcast can contribute, even if a little, to those solutions. Today, we're going to be discussing the challenges of digital equity, and we're very grateful for three distinguished guests here today. Dr. Anna Stubblefield is the Superintendent of Schools at Kansas City. We also have Dwayne McClary, who is the Senior Director of Networks and Partnerships at Digital Promise Global, and Berj Akian, who is the CEO and founder of ClassLink. I am Patrick Devaney, and I'll serve as your host for today's discussion. To start with, I think we'd like to start with perspectives from each of you. And Dr. Stubblefield, we can start with you, please.
Hello, everyone. When I'm asked about digital equity, I currently serve as the superintendent in the urban district in Kansas City, Kansas, and we serve about 22,000 students and families. And what always comes to the forefront for me is ensuring access, and not only access to technology, but access to reliable internet and high-speed internet, and also making sure that our students we have over 70 languages within our school district, that they have access and they have the tools and skills to navigate in order to do what we're asking them to do when using technology. So my perspective is making sure that they have it, the tool, the internet, and then the skill set to navigate it.
Great. So hi, my name is Dwayne McClary, Director of EdTech. Director.
That was the other gig. That was the other gig.
Senior Director of Networks and Partnership at Digital Promise, where I oversee the League of Innovative Schools, Ed Camps, and now most recently we're starting up the League of Innovative Students. So for me, digital equity is a social justice issue. I see it as an opportunity to provide access to more resources and also access to connect people to services. Right now, if you wanted to go out and pay your light bill, pay your cell phone bill, right now the only way to kind of do it is through internet access. Right. I also see digital equity. I would always say it's like a three-pronged stool, but most recently because of COVID, it's a four-pronged stool. One of them is access. The other is digitalization of curriculum and instruction, but also the PD that wraps around that. The third component, I think, is looking at how do we teach our students to utilize devices in a meaningful way, so the digital citizenship. And with everything with COVID, the last one, which is a leg that, the stool of the leg that is most important, which is sustainability. Like, we got all this great funding and we're doing these great things, but when that goes away, what happens? Do we then revert back to the inequities of technology? So I think that's an important process. So within the league, we talk about those different components with our 125 districts across the U.S.
Great.
And hello, everyone. My name is Berj Akian. I'm with ClassLink. Firstly, I think, Dwayne, I really believe Digital Promise is a really thoughtful reflection on this, and Anna as well in your school system. In some ways, I suppose you can think of me as sort of representing some of the vendor partners that are out there. And I don't think there's anybody here. We're here at a conference, and I don't know if you realize those are booths behind us, right there. There's a whole lot of ed tech going on, and I think that's the new paradigm that we live in, and that is that pretty much if you want to accomplish nearly anything of use in a classroom, introduction to technology side, introduction to curricular resources, introduction to use of management systems. Nearly everything is digital today, and so If you don't have access to the resources, it's essentially a barrier to being successful in the classroom. And we're going beyond the students. We're talking about the teachers, the entirety of all the parts. And if the entire ecosystem is moving towards everything needing to be online, if they can't access it, if there's not reliable access to the devices, access to the internet through which these resources are being delivered, you're really basically locking the doors to the school because they can't access what they need. Even if they're in the school, but most especially when they're outside.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much. And with that kind of as the foundation to start our conversation, let's dive in a little bit deeper. And let's start with you, Dr. Stubblefield. How has technology changed in the use of the technology in the district? And let's look at 5 years, because I think 2 years, it's been an acceleration of sorts, but let's look at it over the last 5 years.
So technology in schools has changed tremendously in the last 5 years. When I think about, I was in another district 5 years ago, and we were one-to-one. So when the pandemic hit, all of our students were one-to-one, but yet we weren't ready to educate them in a 100% virtual environment. So I think now a lot of school districts are thinking about, as we roll out one-to-one, what does that mean around professional development for our teachers and the digital citizenship for our students, and then like trying to figure out how much is too much for kids to be online, and what does learning really look like when they can Google almost anything. And a lot of our teachers weren't trained in that way, and we haven't provided them the professional development to talk about how learning has to really look different to engage students. Yet we are faced with this, at least in Kansas, they're measured on a state assessment. And so how do you balance those two? So it's changed tremendously, because I have 3 boys, but I have a 17-year-old that I lived through the pandemic with, and seeing things through his eyes really opened my eyes as a leader around engagement. He absolutely hated the virtual component because it wasn't engaging and he wanted to be in person, yet he spends all of his time on the internet and searching for things. And so we have to figure out that balance about what's pulling them so that they can have that same sort of desire and leverage that online learning.
So you had the benefit, though, of being in a district that was one-to-one.
Yeah.
And seeing this happen. In your opinion, is there any cohort that was affected more or less through the last 5 years? It's not just having a device, but is there any group that was affected more or less?
So I think what the pandemic did was, as my colleague has said, it's become a social justice issue. It did provide access to a lot of students who are typically marginalized by their SES status or where they live. They got access. We had to provide access to them. So they benefited in that way from it. But now we have to be intentional about the sustainability of it to make sure that when all of this funding goes away, how do we still ensure that those families have high-speed internet and that we are providing that digital citizenship? So I think in that way, that group benefited the most. But I also think those innovative teachers, they got an opportunity to shine and lead. And then those who probably were good teachers and not leveraging it, I saw a lot of great teachers become overwhelmed and leave the profession because they're like, if this is how it's going to be, I don't know if they have the capacity. Maybe they didn't have the energy to really do it.
Great. And Dwayne, is your member districts or your members, are you seeing the same kind of trends and occurrences?
Yeah, we're seeing the same trends. For the league, we were kind of beyond, most districts. 8 years ago, we were doing one-to-one already. But what the actual what COVID taught us was that there were still some pockets and gaps that we were missing, mostly, Black and brown kids, marginalized kids. Because what you got to think about is once you have to flip the switch to go fully virtual for our students, some of these families did not have internet access at all. So here I am now providing a hotspot to a student, but what you're actually doing is providing internet for the whole family.
Yeah.
And so then you had to think about, okay, bandwidth, like, do I now throttle the internet because he's over his bandwidth for the month? Or do I continue that? So you got to think about that from a social economic status. Like, that's what we say digital equity is a social justice issue because it's providing access to other information. So we were seeing that across the board from Digital Promise. Another thing that we saw was that when we talk about digital equity in schools, we only thought about the students. Mm-hmm. We immediately noticed that now we're virtual. Teachers have to log on, get on, and teachers didn't have the same resources that the kids had. So I had to go back and rethink, all right, now how do we get access to our teachers? What about these new teachers that don't have, the devices that can, have a Zoom or have Google up and also have something else in the background running? A lot of teachers' devices were freezing. So it was like, you got to think about all those aspects. So building that into your system was kind of a shock to even, we say we're the most innovative school district, but we had never been tested to this component of going fully virtual. So we had to immediately within the league reach out to partners that, we were able to secure some hotspots. We had districts that needed, after we assessed 18,000 hotspots, 21,000 devices, because of our relationship with our partners, we were able to provide those to our districts. So, and at that time, a lot of districts didn't have that access. So because we were the league, we were able to provide that access. So I think that was important. What, outside of that, digital equity just was placed on the mantle for everyone to see in the U.S. and across the country that this is a luxury. It's no longer a luxury for us. It has to be something that is every person has. I think we said this earlier, like whenever I walk in my house and flip my light switch on, I expect my lights to come on and I expect water to be there. Now I think technology and access and internet is one of those resources that has to be a part of, that has to be there. It's not a if, and, or but about it. So hopefully we're moving beyond that. But my fear is the sustainability piece. Like once COVID goes away, then what?
So when you're messaging or talking to your partners or even members of the league, what are the benefits that you lean on that you talk about equity providing?
So, equity for us is looking, a lot of people, when they think of equity, they automatically think of racial equity. There are other components of equity. However, racial equity is a huge component of all its work. But we also got to look at equity around the equity of access, equity of mobility, equity of all of these things. So when you think about supporting the needs of students, I have a model that I support with my team is do right by students. Everything that I do is hopefully pushing us closer to that trajectory of doing right by students. So it's not about a political motivation. It's not about, going with this vendor over that one. When I talk with vendors, because I also see partnerships, I talk about you're coming and joining to roll up your sleeves to do the work of equity, but also to do the work of supporting and doing right by kids with our district leaders. We don't want you here to sell anything. We don't want you here to do that. But how can you come along and help us move the trajectory of students further down the road? We also talk about how do we also develop transformation and innovation so that when COVID does go away, we're not going back to what education was before COVID, but we're moving us above and beyond. So rethinking of what education looks like. And right now, that's a struggle because I think there's nowhere in the U.S. that can tell me that they have transformed and developed something that is new. Like, I feel like we're still stunted and we're just waiting for COVID to go away.
Instead of really reaping the benefits.
Instead of really reaping the benefits, rethinking assessments, rethinking hiring, rethinking schooling. Like, I think all of that needs to happen.
It might be a missed opportunity if we don't take advantage of it.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
It won't be.
Yeah. It will be, if we don't take advantage of it.
Yes.
So there's a little call to action there. Something probably. Barish, from an industry perspective, how do you think companies are responding to these changing needs? And
yeah, I guess first I want to mention something. When you talked about how the teachers needed to adapt and cope, I don't know if you saw that there was a whole bunch of videos that were going around. There was one that was especially hilarious. It was the teacher with the ukulele.
Yes.
Did you see this one? Oh my God. The teacher, Diana, did you see this one?
I think.
So she goes, I wrote a little song for teaching in COVID. And she took out her ukulele and she goes, starts to strum it. And then she just starts screaming at the top of her lungs nonstop while she's strumming, just screaming nonstop. And then she put the ukulele down. And that was sort of where they were, right? They're the turmoil. I think a part of what was that everyone had this experience was a little bit of the metaphor that I have in my head is that tech for a lot of places, not universally so, but in a lot of places went from being supplementary to being core. And that was an overnight abrupt flip, and really the system wasn't prepared for that. And to make tech core meant you needed to have all the devices, of course, universally available, and you needed to have the internet and the modalities and workflows, which all of that needed to be reinvented. Unless you were a school that seemingly had sort of a robust learning management system and a modality of workflows in an online setting already, few did. Everybody needed to figure out devices, figure out internet access, and figure out workflows of communication. Basic communication needed to be reinvented. I mean, previous generation didn't know nothing probably about Zoom, and that's a word we're all intimately aware of. So I feel like that's a construct. When I think about sort of the vendors, I feel like we were right there along, and I'm sort of, I guess I see a lot of vendors, and I think really magical things happened. Collectively across the whole ecosystem of tech partners, whether it was the device manufacturers who stepped up big and delivered as rapidly as they possibly could, the makers and service providers of internet access devices, they stepped up as quickly and they did it in a meaningful way. You heard lots and lots of stories of vendor partners stepping in that way. Lots and lots of tech companies who make any kind of product stepped up as best they can, big and small. And I thought everyone I really felt like it was a family coming together in a crisis. And I appreciate the bit role that we have in that. It was fun to see. I also sometimes think there's oftentimes something radically different feels that it's unprecedented. And I keep thinking, is it truly unprecedented, or have we sort of seen this movie once before, maybe in a different construct? And I think there has been examples, and to the point about bringing an equity conversation into this, there was a time where school lunch wasn't what it is today, wasn't universal.
Yeah.
And today, if you were to have a conversation with someone, it'd be hard for anyone to take the position. What are you kidding? Of course we have to provide school lunches.
Right.
We need for these students to be healthy. We need for them to be learning ready. And so it's a non-issue. So I feel like there's constructs. And there was also in the late 1990s, there's a whole movement across a lot of states where school systems that served sort of underprivileged, low-income areas felt that they weren't getting funded at the rates they needed to provide equitable access to education. And these went through the court systems, and a lot of funding got changed because of that sensibility. So I feel like this script, we've seen this before, and now we're just having the same conversation. Right. And this time, it's not about a sandwich or a slice of pizza or about, access to a theater and a proper gymnasium in my school building. It's about these devices. Yeah. I feel like there's a model there that we can learn from and be better.
Okay.
To your point, be better.
So how do we leverage those learnings from the past? How do we find those conversations and make them?
We got to dig up the grizzled educators who were there at the time and say, how'd you do it? What were the fights that you were having?
Right. But I think Dwayne's key point about being intentional about how will we sustain those things and those things that when we look there, I'm sure they tried a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
But though there are some things that are just entrenched in schools and school systems and how schools operate. So I think really thinking about how did this, because it worked in some capacity and that's why it's still part of us. So being intentional about those things that we are seeing very positive return on investments in order for, and then having, literally making a sustainability plan. Our district received lots of money, additional dollars that we have to spend in this short amount of time. And at least I've tried to be intentional about these are one-time things. This is going to get us off the ground. And so we don't have to, but here are these things that, is this sustainable? So what are we going to do differently in our budget or give up in our budget because we're not going to have these extra dollars? What do we need to stop doing in order to make this to continue to happen? And really asking those questions as we are looking at how we are prioritizing the ARP dollars, the ESSER dollars. And then we put in new heating and ventilation systems. So I've charged our operations to how are we going to maintain this? Because you got to take care of it. So that's sustainability piece. Which I really hadn't thought about it in the context of digital equity and how that impacts it, but everything is so based around technology that you do have to be intentional about it.
And you had 4 tenets you talked about in terms of equity.
Yeah.
Refer back to those, and it's not just getting it done up front, but then it's also maintaining it.
Yeah.
And with teachers and professional development and other areas.
Yeah. So like the 4, like I said, if you think about it, I was only thinking of 3 before, like the access, the curriculum, PD, and then the digital citizenship. And as you know, if you're on a 3-legged stool, it's kind of wobbly. But once you have that 4th leg of sustainability, that's when you get, okay, now I'm grounded. But it's important that not, of these 4 legs, all 4 of them are equally important.
Yeah. Right.
So how do you, as an organization or a school system, how do you hold those 4 pieces at equal funding or equal supports, or even, how do you spend your time in ensuring that all 4 of these legs are being sustained and move forward? I think that's a component. I think a way to get to what you were asking is how do we also include student voice? Everything that we're doing for education, who's the end user? It's not really the teacher. It's not really the superintendent or the school board. It's the student. Have we ever asked them what do they want? What does this look like for you? What would you like for your education to look like in the future?
I have to say, I kind of think sometimes those kids are thinking, are you kidding me? I'm going to do this without a device or without the internet?
Exactly.
I feel like, so what's the question? If we had a room full of young people here, they would say, are you kidding? It can't be done.
And so like we gotta think that through. But then we got to also think about as adults, how do we move out of our construct of what education was for us to what education should be? And we got to get out of our own way, because I think that's where the problem is, because that's how I was trained. That's how I was taught. Like when I went through my education experience and getting trained, nobody told me about digital equity. No one taught me about even blended learning. No one taught me about technology. All I heard about was learning and Bloom's taxonomy. So how are we even exactly? So who else are we even preparing our new folks, which there are limited numbers, to step into this new realm of education? And I think it's going to take more than just higher ed organizations. It's going to take nonprofits. It's going to take school systems. It's going to take organizations, vendors, all of us to push where we want to go. But we got to talk.
It takes some real transparency in terms
exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things I've said to my colleagues of superintendents in Kansas as we meet, and I was like, we're never going to get back to the level of staffing that we were before pre-COVID. So we need to pivot, and we can't wait. We can't just keep saying this is teacher. Like, we can recruit, but we'll never, I honestly, and I've been wrong before, we'll never get back to that level of staffing, bus drive. So how are we going to do school differently? Because we still have to serve the same with the less staff. So what does that mean? Like, what are those models that we can learn for? And as a parent, I do have a 17-year-old who does give me his opinion about school, and he's like, I don't understand why I have to go there all day, every day, when I can do the work in an hour. He enjoys going to school.
Well, you have a whole workforce saying the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. And he's like, why am I sitting there? And I didn't have an answer. So we're doing this dance with him, like, well, because and he, for the life of him, he can't, it frustrates him and his friends to the core around. He was like, well, we weren't just sitting in class all the time. He likes being at school, but he's like, why do I have to do that if I can do my work in an hour? And
what's fascinating is that if, when he goes on to a college experience, goes on to a work experience, potentially, this might be the last moment of his life where he's got to be rigidly in a room or in a building 5 days a week for fixed hours. It might be the last experience in his life like that, potentially. How fascinating is that?
Another thing that I want to hit on what you said is, how do we learn from each other? How does we learn from industry, and how does industry learn from K-12? So when COVID hit, one of our districts, El Cajon Valley in California, David Mirashiro was the superintendent there. They never closed when COVID hit because he looked at the model that Trader Joe's was using to maintain and to stay open. So looking at the social distance and looking at, so he looked at all of their models. He even brought them into his district to talk about, all right, I want to know what you're doing to stay open. Making it work? How do we transport that into K-12? So I think there's a lot to learn from each other that I think, we should definitely be talking about, because I don't want to go back to what education was.
Oh, well, yes.
We can't. Honestly, we can't. And if we did, I think we're going to lose a lot of kids because they're going to just throw their hands up and say, what is this?
I was at an event, the superintendent's in the room, and I asked the question. I said, how are you envisioning this upcoming fall? Because things are still a little bit, a little shaky right now. But how do you envision this fall? You've distributed, nearly everyone in the room went full one-to-one. And this is to your point earlier, Anna. You talked about, we were one-to-one, but not really one-to-one. We had one-to-one in the classroom, not take-home. So now I think we have sort of recognition that there's lots and lots of school systems that are fully one-to-one, nearly all grades. What's the fall going to look like? How is it going to be different? Are we really going to now imagine a classroom setting, every classroom setting where every device is coming in a way that was how they did it when they were home? They were constantly online. And I think we got another paradigm shift coming up. And a full school cycle. You're talking about having fewer staff.
How we are making it happen now, like it's part of our new normal, but how do we innovatively make it engaging and not like just trying to get through the day? Because right now, everybody's like getting through the day. I'm going to cover this class and this class. So how do we not look at, because literally I have to get on a staffing call and they're like, well, the ratio for elementary is 1 to 21 and we need this many people. So if we don't get that many people, how do we partner with industry, nonprofits? And everybody keeps looking at me like I have something on my head. And I said, so we don't have enough teachers, but what about if we partner with the local yoga studio and they can come in and be with the kids for an hour, teach self-regulation. You'll have your plan time. Because I don't have all of those people to make sure and they're just looking at me like, well, what? And I was like, the same money that we would be spending to allocate, and I don't know, I just saw preschoolers in a innovative preschool in my city, and they had yoga and they were teaching self-regulation to 3-year-olds, and they had the data to show how that changed how they interacted when they got to middle school and high school. And so I keep using the yoga example. And I was like, if we do things like there are lots of partners that were like, you can come after school, before school. So how do we put them in the school day to make sure all of our kids have access to allow teachers to have time to plan or to collaborate with them? Because we're just going to have to do school differently. But
because there could be a whole market for vendor partners who can come in and provide services to address teacher planning periods.
Yes.
But see, that goes back to the model. Because we're thinking of school.
I mean, not me, because I'm busy. But, I'm saying,
but we're thinking of school, like you said, in the old model.
Right.
Because, you know, a student's ability to learn should not be based on one individual, one teacher anymore. Exactly. It can't be. No. Because if someone gets COVID or someone gets sick or, God forbid, they don't come back to school, education has to go on. So what does that look like?
Yeah.
So, like, that's the thing we need to start thinking of.
I think there's something, to your point, touch on, like, changing it up a little bit. This is the TikTok generation. Like, you gotta change it up. Changing it up. Otherwise, you're going to lose me.
They've lessened the workload in terms of provisioning and provide access to more. It's a different tool than what would have been used before.
Correct.
And I'm sure there's more examples of that, but that kind of creative thinking is going to be required.
Automation wherever possible.
Oh, yeah. Like, I think, you know, AI is coming, you know, it's a big thing now. So how do we utilize those components to help teachers spend more time with students versus grading papers and so like we got to think about all of those components,
because if you can take away that grading paper, like how the end product looks, then you're not taking it home to grade. Like if there's some sort of performance task or some in actual product that I show you, then I'm not reading 15 pages of something. Absolutely, our kids need to know how to write and do those things, but how they communicate is so very different that we have to change our assessment model. Because when I can buy Grammarly, and I'm not saying kids shouldn't know those things.
No, I use that tool.
But when I can do that and basically dictate a whole paper, I'm going to learn naturally by maybe reading it versus you spending 9 weeks on teaching me this.
But see that once again,
writing versus typing.
Once again, as adults, we have that ability to change the way we utilize technology and learn and utilize tools. Are we giving that same leeway to students?
Well, I think I think there's something magical there where, and this is sort of like a box around like workflows, right? Classroom workflows. There's something magical that's possible if we can bring about sort of a modality of sort of self-assessment through some of these tools. I learn as I compose a statement and I put it into Grammarly. My technique is I write it up and I drop it in and I see my score. And it's been going up, I have to say. So there's learning that's happening there in a modality. You're getting
that authentic, immediate feedback.
And you're like, oh, I didn't think of writing that.
Exactly. And it really changes the way I write future statements. And that's an educational moment for me. So I wonder if future systems have that kind of I mean, like every content company out there, give me a break, Rich. We've been working on like feedback systems since we started this. So I don't know if that's so remarkable. But.
So let's talk a little bit more about the continuity, because clearly that's a challenge. How do we continue? And is it a burden that districts have to bear on their own, or is it something that we need to look at broader and get policy changes?
I think it's a burden the districts cannot bear on their own. And I think the intentionality around like collaborating with businesses and community partners and then lobbying around, there are some things that we absolutely have to do because it's state statute or federal law or all of those kind of things that in some ways do limit, but some of them are so broad that as long as you have the outcome, but it's something that districts can't do, because if we work in isolation, we're not preparing our students for what we're hoping you one day will hire them for, or that they will create for themselves. We can't bear it alone.
Yes, my thing in the back of my mind was that continuity with who? Because the question is, I'm reading articles now because we support superintendents in my organization, where there's a great exodus. The great resignation is, in my mind, is for teachers, but there's a great exodus for superintendents. There's numbers now showing 30 to 40% of superintendents are walking away within the next year or so. So
I'm waiting to hear the statistics at this event.
Exactly. So my thing is, when you say continuity, like there has to be more than just the school leader. You have to also think about the school leader and their cabinet. Who are we working with? Because when the school leader steps away, hopefully there's systems in place and transformation that's been happening, that when that person steps away, the innovation doesn't go with them. So when we say continuity, we also have to build that muscle within your districts to think about those policies and procedures. I think of transformation, I see it as the 3 Ps for a district leader. You have policy, you have procedures, and then you have the political will. Hopefully that leader has all 3 of those that can push this information. But if you don't have that policy and procedures in place, that political will doesn't matter. Okay. Because when that person steps away, then what? Then the district goes back into, we got to rethink this, and it's a 5-year, like you push them back 5 years because we're going through the same listening tour when a new superintendent come on, and thinking about this person, learning this. It gets, that's how education becomes stifled,
and especially the moment we're in right now, right? With the rotation.
Because I watched, like, as I inherited this district, it was 3 of us that came on that I'm close to in the Kansas City area. One, there was a session plan, 2 of them actually, and they walked right in, and the listening tour was different. It was really like, here it's me, and this is how I'm going to continue. My listening tour is like, okay, we have all these things that are not, like, it was like really like this, you got to fix all of these things. And theirs were so different. So when you have those policies and procedures in place and things don't walk out the door and you can build off of them and pivot where you need to, it's very different walking in and like, oh, we're building a plane while we're flying. Okay, got this. And so superintendents are like,
with COVID.
And then so I think a lot of superintendents are like, this is crazy. I'm not doing this, because the unrealistic expectations of I'm going to do, like, build a plane, fly it with COVID and be on par, like it, and then politically navigate all of the things. It's like, can't do it. But those places that have systems, it's been a little easier transit. Like, they still have challenges, but they can focus and not build the plane.
Well, to really take advantage of the opportunity of this time with the change, and kind of push that change to make it stick.
Right.
Yeah.
That makes that even harder, because now you've got shifting people in the middle of it all as well.
The other thing that district leaders I've heard from the league is, like, they just want to do their work. Like, right now, they've become the chief health officer for everything. Like, that's all they're dealing with. Like, they don't have time to look at curriculum and instruction and get out and do this work, because they're just dealing with COVID.
Yeah.
So it's like, who's doing that work? And then kind of innovation has taken a back seat, because I'm just trying to keep the doors open.
Absolutely. When school opened this year, my entire cabinet, everybody in district office, because we hadn't filled, it was a transition and some things got lost in translation, and we had over 60 openings. We all were in classrooms so kids could start. And then we were able to figure some things out and not sub. But probably the first 2 to 3 weeks, which was great for us to be there with kids, but we weren't doing the things we were hired to do. And then people were like, well, what about this? And what about that? I'm like, well, I was teaching. Sorry, I'll get back to you about whether we're going to have mask or no mask. Like, yeah.
What's the biggest resistance that you get when trying to push forward some of these initiatives? What's not to say naysayer, but what's the pushback? What's the biggest blocker?
Change is hard. Like, I think it's simple as different and new. I don't know. So this has worked for me, or maybe it hasn't worked for me, but at least I know what I'm doing with it. I think it's just the fear of the unknown. Like, it is completely, and as much as we have talked about in education, and you probably can go any conference and talk the fail forward and take risk, is not really supported in how people are evaluated and ranked. You look at all the educational rankings and state assessments. So there's really no room for error, yet you gotta be able to take risk and learn from them and move forward.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like, for most time, people are, especially your school boards, like, they're afraid of change because it's the unknown area. I don't know that. So why would so I'm not comfortable. It's a comfort thing. So until you get folks that are willing to take risks and understand sometimes you got to get uncomfortable to get to the area where you want to be, like, that's when change happens. Prime example, I was in K-12 15 years, been in rural, urban, suburban districts, in leadership posts. when this opportunity came to work with Digital Promise, a nonprofit, I was uncomfortable. But I saw the opportunity and I was willing to change and learn something new. We have to do that same thing with education. You got to be able to take risks. You got to be able to be in discomfort. And you got to be able to support each other and talk through the process. Because if you don't, that's where the stifledness comes from. That's where, leaders and boards are not getting together because someone's stuck in a comfort area.
And I think it's interesting. Change is identified as the biggest obstacle.
Yes.
Very often one would think it's money.
It's not money.
Money's part of it, but it certainly
money is a small, because normally you can figure it out. Like you can either shift where your dollars are, and I'm not saying that, but even in this time where we have lots of money, like extra money, it's like when you're saying things around to boards and they're like, well, no,
we never did that.
Bring me more data back.
Exactly.
And you're like, well, I'm spending all of this time. We could have had evidence around that.
Right. Well, I have one more question, and I guess I would look to you, Barış, to say, is there anything that you would like to see the commercial side of the ed tech industry here bring to the table, or think that companies can do to help with the challenges that are out there?
I guess when it comes to what sort of the vendor partner community and how they can particularly help is to be thoughtful. And I think, ClassLink leans into this a little bit, to be thoughtful about how their products and services complement and integrate with one another. Because I always feel like there's the risk that, a vendor partner comes in and sort of operates with blinders. This is the thing I do. You should want the thing I do. It's a good thing that I do, and here's how much it costs and all this stuff. And we sort of operate in blinders, and we don't sort of look at the ecosystem around which. And I feel like if there was a greater awareness, and I don't know necessarily how to build that. I know, at our shop, we work hard reaching out and developing relationships with a whole lot of hundreds actually. And so we do that really intentionally because we want to make it so that when we visit with the schools that we serve, we can articulate, here's how it can work really great with this one. Here's how it works great with this one. Here's how it works. And that thing is helpful. And today, it's not just enough that, some ed tech company goes and buys a bunch of companies, right? It's just evolved together. There's a lot. That's one approach, I suppose. But there's still sort of this moat around it. And I'm thinking we got to drain those moats and build bridges between. Yeah. Because I think that's what you all want, right? I think it's what you want in schools. You want the vendors to sort of figure some of this stuff out. Otherwise, it's on your plate. We show up and we say, here's what it is. And you're like, well, how's this going to work with the other thing? I don't know. Yeah. And you're left to figure that out. I would say that could be something worthwhile that we should do.
Very much
more of.
Yep. Yeah,
We're already doing something.
Completely agree with that. And
that's your job.
That's my job. So.
Your day gig.
Well, I think certainly at this table, we all agree that it's going to take effort on many, many stakeholders. It's going to, and part of advancing this is convincing those that don't see the need necessarily or don't want to jump in line and contribute, understand the benefits and the value that it's going to bring. We also kind of, I think, came to the common agreement here, common ground, that it has to be intentional. We all have to make intentional efforts to advance the equity and what's available. And in making those efforts, we have to think about sustaining it. It's not just enough to make something happen today, but we have to build some tools and measures that allow this to go forward. And I think finally, at the very basis of this conversation is that technology, equity and access to technology is core. It's a social issue, but it's also a burden that schools can't take on their own. It just creates added stress. It's something that is necessary, just like food and water. It's become a necessary part of the equation. So I think I certainly hear common agreement and alignment in those thoughts. Is there anything else that I missed in that?
I'll say my last thought is, yes, digital equity is important, but it's not the silver bullet. Like, I want folks to understand that. It is an important piece of it, but it's not the silver bullet that's going to solve a lot of our problems. It still goes back to the teacher. Like, we're not saying we want devices over teaching. No. We want quality and powerful learning teaching experiences with the help of this great tool of technology and digital equity. So I think that's important. I think all of us can agree on.
Very well said. I agree. Yeah.
And I think my last thought goes back to something you said, is we have to include student voice in this process, because they are end users. And we, like Trader Joe's, think about that customer service really, and how do we provide those opportunities for they can have space at the table to inform the outcomes while we're looking at that, because they probably have some very powerful and very innovative ideas around that. Yeah.
Any parting thought there?
Yeah, and for me, I'm grateful to be part of this conversation. I'm grateful for the work that you all are doing at Digital Promise. I think articulating this and framing it, I think I keep going back to, let's see how we've done things like this before, because obviously we've agreed on how to do things like this in seismic ways in the past. And if we figured out how to do it and fix it in enduring ways on some other topic, we can figure out how to build an enduring solution this time around on this matter as well. So,
great. Thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.
Anna, Wayne, Berge, for this rich and very enjoyable conversation. Our goal is to continue to socialize interoperability-based issues and find common ground in the education technology space, and hope we can make a difference and do it together. ClassLink is proud to sponsor this meeting and facilitate these conversations. And please look for our next conversation, which is going to be around the challenges of selecting digital resources. You can find this recording on our media center at mediahub@classlink.com. And if you have suggestions or topics or would like to participate in one of these conversations, you can reach out to us at perspectives@classlink.com. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. ClassLink is proud to be the meeting place to facilitate these conversations. If you have a topic idea, send it to perspectives@classlink.com. To keep hearing our perspectives, be sure to follow us on Apple and Spotify and subscribe to us on YouTube.